to my students, I'm a teacher, so I will sound like a lecturer here. Forgive me for that. I can't speak any other way. Too many lectures I've given in my life. I teach the origins of patriarchy to my students, okay, as a student, as a scholar of women's studies. And therefore this question fascinates me, the question of the how and the why. What purpose, what function, what role does it serve ruling classes, dominant social groups and governments to control, to regiment the sexual choices and lives of people? How is this, we might call it a sexual regime of control? How is it linked to political rule? How is it linked to economic changes? In other words, what we call the political economy. Okay? How is this expressed in culture and sanctioned by religion? I won't go into that though, the second part, culture and religion. So I'm going to take a leaf out of my teaching. This is what I always tell my students, that there is, and you will see, as I say, the parallels with the oppression of alternative sexual choices and lives, that there is nothing natural within quotes, about the subordination of women. It is not preordained or biological, but socially constructed always. Although, of course, the forms it has taken have been changing over periods of time, but every time when it takes a particular form, it creates a myth that it has always existed, that it has always been so, and that this is the natural. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Nature, therefore, is always called upon, it's invoked to validate an oppressive code of sexual control. So it could be ruling classes or governments who use arguments from nature and say, it is nature. So in a sense, nature becomes this battleground. It's being invoked in this battle. So the outlines, bare bones of the argument I make, by now it is well known that why is it that why and when did women's sexualities come to be controlled historically? This happened at a far earlier period in our civilizational histories. The purpose of this control was A, to ensure that property is passed from father to son, that the purity of the family name, so to speak, is maintained. So property A, patrilineal, right, which is the descent or inheritance of property from father to son, and the name, it's also the name of the clan or the caste, right, and progeny. So in a sense, it's these three P's in sociology: property, progeny, and patrilineal. If you understand that, you pretty much understand the dynamic of social control in India, right? And before agriculture and livestock emerged as the sources of wealth, right, when people were hunters and gatherers, and when there was no wealth to control, it was not necessary for an individual man to know that this child in my tribe is my child. It's the fruit of my loin, so to speak. It was not necessary because there was no property that I needed to hand down to my child. Therefore, there was no need for me to control or police the sexuality of the women of my family or my clan. What would happen then is that the children of a tribe, and talking about tribes that are migratory in a sense, moving, there's no agriculture yet, would be looked after by all adults in that tribe without it being necessary for a man in that tribe to know that this child was my child. The link obviously between the mother and the child was far stronger in this case, right? Now this changes gradually over a period of time when agricultural societies start, when livestock also becomes a form of wealth. When women begin to be confined within the home, there is a restriction, a policing of women's mobility, physical movement outside the home, and of women's sexual freedoms and sexual choices, right? Now, why does this happen? Because this restriction alone can ensure the sexual purity of women, and ensuring the sexual purity of women alone can ensure that there is the certainty of knowledge. This child is my child, right? So in other words, please let us imagine there was a period of time and it was not necessary to say, yen pulla, yen rattam, yen sadi, yen sottu, right? So when that comes into being, then it becomes necessary to obviously confine women of certain classes within the home and to police their sexuality. If you could not do this, if we could not have done it in history, if women could have moved freely across castes and class groups, then neither caste nor class could have been sustained. And this is a fundamental truth, that this confinement, this sexual subordination of women, this sexual control, this division of women into the good woman and the bad woman, the chaste wife and the whore or the vamp or the slut or whatever you call her, that control is essential, is one of the building blocks by which a certain social order is sustained, whether it is on the basis of caste or it is on the basis of class, right? In fact, Periyar would use a very nice word to refer to this. He called it Garbha Achi. He would say it is a regime of control over women's reproductive lives and sexual choices. Archi, as you know, is a form of government. So it's a form of government, no less. And whenever there is a resistance by women to women's choices, remember, as happened recently, when women choose partners across caste groups, especially if they are from the oppressed castes, then the kind of anxiety and the backlash that we see is something more, it's something very deep. In fact, what it is an attempt to reconstruct these boundaries. It is an attempt to raise the boundaries again. It's an attempt to rebuild, to reaffirm these boundaries, precisely when these boundaries are being challenged. Okay? So the point I've made so far is very briefly to say that there is therefore gradually across human history and civilization, over a period of time, there comes to be a deep distrust of any sexual self-expression that is not conducted for the purpose of procreation, that is not tied to the reproductive function, and that is therefore not performed within the bounds of the family. That distrust has started, that distrust has its origins in the subordination of women. Let's not forget that, right? And this is consolidated with the age of what we know as industrial capitalism, and it becomes even more necessary to ensure that property is passed on. This is also the period when there is a very interesting separation between the home and the workplace. Workplace becomes the factory. The home is no longer a unit of production, the independent artisan, craftsman, tool person, right? The home becomes the site of consumption and of reproduction. What happens within the family is a lot of production, women's unwaged work. Women are doing work without receiving wages. Women are reproducing labor power for the next generation to go into factories and work. So there's biological reproduction as well. And there is ideological transmission of values. That ideology is constantly telling us. This ideology is transmitted within the family through schools, religious institutions, but the family is the primary mode, no, where it's translated. And that ideology is telling us constantly that this is how it's always been, although it was only about 200 years old or 300 years old, that this is natural, this is how it's always been, it's never changed, this is the divinely ordained way of being. When that family form becomes central in what we call, in what sociologists call a capitalist society or a bourgeois society, then any sexual relationship, either by men or by women, which is outside the bounds of that family, which does not serve the social needs of industrial capitalism, that sexual relationship is threatening. That sexual relationship questions this regime of control, right? Which is also why historically, if you see, it was only over the last 200 years that in many parts of Western Europe and North America, a very repressive regime towards homosexuality has actually emerged. You can actually map it and say, you can look historically at the making of industrial capitalism, the ideal of the bourgeois family, and the stamping out of any other alternate sexuality that does not serve this purpose, right? Nobody has told me it's 5 minutes yet. It's 5 minutes? Mudichacha? Okay. So when it's my second turn, I'd like to add something, but I'll come back then. But please think about this. Thank you so much.